My name is Reginald Hayes, and at 70 years old, I thought I was done with life's hard lessons. But my own son was about to teach me the most painful one of all. I paid for my family's dream vacation to Jamaica, first-class tickets, a five-star resort, everything. But when I got to the airport, my son called me. "Dad, you're not coming." Then I heard his wife whisper, "Finally a vacation without the old man." They thought they had played me for a fool. They thought they were coming home to the life I had paid for. But when their key didn't fit the lock, they found a package on the doorstep. And when they opened it, their screams told me the vacation was officially over. Before I tell you exactly what I did, hit that like and subscribe button. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments because this is a story about a line being crossed. And I want to know, what would you have done? The clinking of silverware against porcelain was the only sound in the cavernous dining room. It felt accusatory, each sharp tap echoing in the strained silence. I sat at the head of the table, a position of honor that lately felt more like a gilded cage. My son Darnell and his wife Tiffany sat opposite me. Sunday dinner, a tradition my late wife Gloria started decades ago, now felt like a court summons I was obligated to attend. Tiffany set her fork down with a dramatic flourish. She sighed, a practiced sound engineered to convey the weight of the world on her shoulders. "I'm just so exhausted," she announced to the ceiling. "Truly, my work, the kids, this house, it's all just so much." I said nothing, carving into my roast chicken. Tiffany's work was a lifestyle blog that had never earned a dime, and this house was the one I bought and paid off for them a decade ago. Darnell, right on cue, jumped into his role as the doting husband. "I know, honey," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "We're all exhausted. The whole family needs a vacation, a real vacation." And there it was. The trap was set. "I've been seeing my friends on Instagram." Tiffany continued, her eyes getting a dreamy quality. "They're in Jamaica, a five-star resort in Montego Bay. It looks absolutely divine." She flicked her eyes toward me, a glance that lasted less than a second but was heavy with expectation. If only we could afford it. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a demand wrapped in flimsy paper. Montego Bay, the place Gloria and I had always dreamed of visiting. The trip we were planning for our 40th anniversary before cancer took her from me. That they would use my own dream against me left a bitter taste in my mouth. I looked over at my grandchildren. Jordan, 15, was glued to the phone I'd bought him for Christmas. Maya, 10, was meticulously pushing the peas on her plate into a perfect circle. I loved them more than life itself, but I couldn't ignore the fact that they were being raised by two shameless opportunists. For a moment, my life flashed before my eyes. Waking up at 4 in the morning to head to construction sites. The calloused hands, the aching back from decades of hauling lumber, mixing mortar, and building a company from nothing. I did it all so Darnell wouldn't have to. But instead of building his own life, he had simply pitched a tent on the foundation I'd laid. The luxury car he drove, the private school tuition for the kids, the designer clothes Tiffany wore. It was all built on my sweat. Their life was a performance, and I was the unwilling producer. I decided to play along. It was time to see just how deep this well of greed went. "All right," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. Both Darnell and Tiffany looked up, their faces a mixture of caution and hope, as if they couldn't believe the fish was biting so easily. "I'll pay for it." I let the words hang in the air. Everything I added, looking them both dead in the eye. First-class tickets. The five-star resort in Montego Bay you mentioned, Tiffany. An oceanfront suite for the whole family, all 5 of us. The transformation was immediate. Tiffany's eyes widened, and for the first time all evening, a genuine smile, a smile of pure, unadulterated greed spread across her face. Darnell let out a soft sigh of relief, as if a financial burden he had never actually carried had just been lifted. "Oh, Dad." Tiffany gushed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I don't know what to say." "You are the absolute best," Darnell chimed in. "Thanks, Dad. This really means a lot to us." But I saw no gratitude in their eyes. I just saw dollar signs. They didn't ask if I wanted to go or if I even liked Jamaica. They didn't say, "Dad, you deserve this." They just accepted. Immediately, they launched into a rapid-fire discussion about new resort wear they needed to buy, about snorkeling excursions and expensive restaurants they wanted to try. The man funding this fantasy, had become invisible in my own conversation. I just sat there quietly finishing my water, feeling a block of ice slowly forming in my chest. I had agreed to pay for the trip, but I knew deep down the real cost was going to be much, much higher. The planning, if you could call it that, began the next day. And by planning, I mean Tiffany took complete control. My inbox was flooded with confirmation emails, but they were notifications, not invitations for my input. She'd call me, her voice buzzing with an excitement that had nothing to do with spending time with family. I booked the glass-bottom boat tour, Dad, she chirped over the phone one afternoon. It was only $200 a person. A steal. I don't much care for boats, I replied, my voice flat. Tiffany just laughed, a light dismissive sound. Oh, Dad, it's about the experience. You don't have to go. You just have to pay for it. The words hung in the air between us, brutally honest. I was not a participant. I was the bank. A few days later, Darnell called. The conversation started with the usual phony pleasantries. How are you feeling, Dad? You taking it easy? He never waited for an answer. He just needed to check the box before getting to the real reason for his call. So, Dad, Tiffany and I were talking, and we think we're going to need a little extra spending money. You know, for shopping tips for the staff, that sort of thing. The casual way he said it made my blood run cold. It was an afterthought to him, a minor detail. For me, it was another withdrawal from a lifetime of hard labor. I decided to test him. Is $5,000 enough? I asked, a cynical edge to my voice. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, calculating. Well, could you maybe make it 10,000? Darnell finally said, his voice hesitant. You know, just to be safe. Just to be safe. As if $10,000 was a safety cushion, not a down payment on a car. After I hung up, I walked into my study and stared at the photograph of Gloria on the mantelpiece. I remembered how we used to drop our spare change into a big glass jar for years, saving up for a simple weekend trip to Savannah. We drove our old Ford-packed sandwiches and stayed in a modest motel. The joy wasn't in the spending. The joy was in being together. I looked at my beautiful wife's smiling face and felt a profound sense of disappointment in the man our son had become. We had taught him the value of hard work, of integrity, or so I thought. Where had we gone so wrong? The breaking point, the moment the ice in my chest finally hardened into steel, came 2 days before the trip. I had stopped by Darnell's house to give Maya a book I'd bought for her to read on the plane. As I walked up the marble steps I had paid for, I heard her sweet little voice through the open window. She was on the phone with a friend, her voice bubbling with the excitement only a 10-year-old can possess. Yeah, Grandpa Reggie is coming too. Mommy says we have to be extra nice to him so he'll keep paying for everything. The innocent words of a child parroting the toxic lessons of her parents struck me like a physical blow. It wasn't her fault. She was just repeating what she'd heard, what she'd been taught, that love was transactional, that her grandfather was not a person but a resource, a means to an end. In that moment, standing on the porch of the house I built for them, I felt a lifetime of love and sacrifice curdle into something cold and sharp. An idea clear and unforgiving began to form in my mind. The vacation was still on, but the itinerary had just changed. The air in the airport buzzed with the frantic energy of departure. I felt strangely calm, a quiet resolve settling over me like a heavy coat. I'd packed a small carry-on, playing my part to the very end. From a distance, I saw them at the check-in counter. Darnell, Tiffany, Jordan, and Maya, all 5 of them standing beside a mountain of designer luggage. 5 passports, 5 tickets. My ticket, the one I had paid for, was supposed to be waiting for me. I started walking towards them, my steps even and measured. My phone rang. The screen flashed with Darnell's name. Dad, where are you? He asked, a fake note of concern in his voice. Right behind you, son, I said, my voice steady. I saw him flinch. He turned around, his eyes wide with panic when he saw me standing not 10 feet away. He looked like a cornered animal. Dad, listen. There's been a mix-up. The airline, they overbooked the flight. Your seat, it's not available. The lie was pathetic, so poorly constructed it was almost insulting. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, letting the silence stretch. I saw the 5 boarding passes clutched in his hand. I saw the guilt and the weakness warring on his face. Then through the phone, I heard Tiffany's voice, a sharp, venomous whisper he thought I couldn't hear. "Just tell him, Darnell. We'll finally have a vacation without this old man." The words sliced through me sharper than any knife. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the complete and utter disrespect, the cold-blooded dismissal of my existence. I was not a father, not a grandfather. I was an inconvenience, an obstacle to their perfect parent-funded life. Darnell mumbled something about getting it sorted out and quickly hung up. He wouldn't look at me. He turned his back, gathered his family, and herded them towards the security gate. Jordan glanced back once, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, before Tiffany pulled him along. Maya didn't see me at all. They walked through the gate and disappeared from view. Not a single wave, not one backward glance. The pain was sharp, a physical ache in my chest. But then something else washed over it. A cold, clarifying rage. The ice in my heart wasn't just solid anymore. It was razor sharp. They had made their choice. Now I would make mine. I turned my back straight and walked out of the airport. The warm California sun felt different, brighter. I took out my phone, my fingers steady as I scrolled through my contacts. I pressed the call button. "Evelyn." "It's Reginald Hayes," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "It's time. Let's begin." Evelyn Reed's office was on the 34th floor of a steel and glass tower overlooking the city. It was a world away from the dust and grit of the construction sites where I had made my living. Evelyn was the opposite of me in almost every way. She was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 50s with a mind as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. But we shared one crucial quality, a complete intolerance for nonsense. She had been my lawyer for 20 years, and she had been warning me about Darnell and Tiffany for the last 5. She didn't greet me with sympathy. She greeted me with a single knowing nod. So she said, her voice calm and even. It finally happened. I sat down in the leather chair opposite her desk. They left me at the airport, Evelyn, took the tickets I paid for, and left me standing on the curb. Evelyn's expression didn't change. She simply folded her hands on the polished mahogany desk, and the revocable living trust we set up 3 years ago. "It is still in place, I assume." "Everything is in place," I confirmed, "just as we discussed." "Good," she said. She opened a file that was already sitting on her desk. She knew this call was coming. "As you know, Reginald, you are the sole trustee of the Hayes Family Trust. The title for the house on Sycamore Lane is held by that trust. Your son and his wife are listed as beneficiaries upon your death, but as long as you are alive, they are in legal terms occupants with no lease agreement. They have the same legal standing as a guest who has overstayed their welcome." I felt a grim satisfaction hearing her say the words. It had been Evelyn's idea. Years ago, when I told her I wanted to buy Darnell and Tiffany a house, she had insisted on this structure. "Don't just give it to them, Reggie," she had said. "Protect yourself. Protect your assets." At the time, I thought she was being overly cynical. Now I saw it for what it was, wisdom. "So we can proceed with the eviction?" I asked. Evelyn slid a document across the desk. "This is a 30-day notice to vacate. It is perfectly legal and frankly quite generous under the circumstances. We will have it served tomorrow morning. Once they return, they will be legally notified that they have 1 month to remove themselves and their belongings from the property." "And what about their access to my money?" I asked. She had a separate file for that. "The joint bank account you share with Darnell can be frozen immediately due to suspected unauthorized activity. You are the primary account holder. You have that right. The credit cards you pay for on which they are authorized users can be canceled with a single phone call. The cars which are titled in your name can be reported as unauthorizedly in their possession if they refuse to return them. The insurance policies, the cell phone plan, the country club membership." She ticked each item off a list. "We can sever every financial tie within the hour." It was a systematic dismantling of the life they had taken for granted. Every luxury, every convenience, every pillar of their inflated existence was about to be pulled out from under them. For a moment I pictured their faces, the shock, the outrage, the disbelief. I felt a pang of something, but it wasn't pity. It was a deep, profound sadness for the relationship we could have had, the one they had squandered for a life of ease. Evelyn looked at me, her gaze steady. "Are you sure about this, Reginald? Once we start this process, there is no going back." I thought of Gloria's smiling face in the photograph on my mantle. I thought of her belief in hard work and earning your place in the world. And I thought of that cold, dismissive whisper at the airport. Finally, a vacation without this old man. I am more sure than I have been about anything in a very long time, I said. Let's begin. I left Evelyn's office and didn't go home. I went to a small, quiet coffee shop a few blocks away. I didn't want to be surrounded by the memories of Gloria, by the ghosts of the family we were supposed to be. I needed a sterile environment, a place with no emotional connection, to do what had to be done. I ordered a black coffee, sat in a booth in the back, and took out my phone and a small notebook. Evelyn had given me a checklist. It was time to start. First, the bank. I dialed the number for the private client services, a line I had access to because of the amount of money I kept with them. A polite young man named David answered. "Mr. Hayes," he said cheerfully. "How can I help you today, David?" I said, my voice low and even. "I need to report suspected unauthorized activity on my primary joint account and freeze it immediately." There was a slight pause. "Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that, sir. Can you tell me the nature of the activity?" "No," I said firmly. "I cannot discuss the details at this time. I am the primary account holder. I want the account frozen effective immediately. No withdrawals, no transfers, no charges, nothing. I also want to cancel all debit cards associated with the account except for my own." I could hear him typing furiously. "I understand, sir. I'm processing that for you right now. The account ending in 4722 is now frozen. All associated cards except for your primary card have been deactivated. Is there anything else I can do? That's all, David. Thank you." I hung up. The first cord was cut. That account paid their mortgage, or rather the property taxes and insurance on the house I owned. It paid for their groceries, their gas, their endless stream of online purchases. As of 3 minutes ago, it was a useless piece of plastic in Darnell's wallet. Next, the credit cards. This was the engine of their lifestyle. The American Express Platinum, the Chase, Sapphire Reserve, the Neiman Marcus store card, all in my name, with them as authorized users. I started with American Express. I navigated the automated menu until I got a real person. "I need to remove 2 authorized users from my account," I said, giving the agent Darnell's and Tiffany's names. "Certainly, Mr. Hayes." "Can I ask the reason they are no longer authorized?" I said simply. I didn't need to give a reason. The agent didn't push. As she was processing the cancellation, she said, "I see a recent charge from the Montego Bay Hyatt Resort. Is that a valid charge, sir?" "Yes," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. "That one is valid. Let it go through. It's the last one." I repeated the process 2 more times. With each call, my voice grew stronger, my resolve hardening. I pictured Tiffany at the resort boutique swiping that card without a second thought, buying a new handbag or a ridiculously expensive sun hat, all while thinking she had gotten away with it. I imagined the moment, perhaps only a day or 2 from now, when she would try to buy another trinket and the card would be declined. The public humiliation, the confusion turning to dawning horror. It was a small, petty thought, but it brought me a sliver of dark satisfaction. Then the car insurance. This felt different, more serious. For 15 years, I had carried Darnell and his family on my policy. I had paid for the top-tier coverage on their luxury SUV and sedan. I called my agent, a man named George I'd known for years. "George, it's Reggie Hayes." "Reggie. How are you, my friend?" "I'm all right, George. Listen, I need to make a change to my policy. I need to remove 2 vehicles and 2 drivers." I gave him the details of Darnell's and Tiffany's cars and their driver's license numbers. George was quiet for a moment. "Reggie, is everything okay?" "This is a significant change. Everything is exactly as it needs to be, George. They are no longer under my financial care. They will need to secure their own insurance." "All right, Reggie. As of the end of this call, those vehicles are no longer covered under your policy." I hung up the phone and felt a strange sense of lightness. For years I had carried the risk for them. The liability for their actions on the road, another invisible safety net they never even knew was there. Now it was gone. They were driving around Jamaica, and when they landed back in Los Angeles and got into their cars, they would be uninsured. They would be exposed. They would be, for the first time in their adult lives, completely on their own. The final calls were a blur. The cell phone provider cutting their lines from my family plan, the prestigious country club revoking the family membership I'd paid a fortune for. Each call was a nail in the coffin of the life they knew. By the time I finished, my coffee was cold. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city. I had been in the coffee shop for nearly 3 hours. In that time, I had systematically and completely erased the financial foundation of my son's life. There was no joy in it, only a grim, quiet sense of necessity. I had built an empire for my family, but when they tried to exile the king, they had forgotten one crucial fact. The king was the one who had built the castle, and he was the only one who knew how to tear it down. Back in the quiet of my own home, the adrenaline from the phone calls began to fade, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The house felt vast and empty. Every shadow seemed to hold a memory of Gloria. I walked into my study, the room where we spent so many evenings reading and talking, and sat down heavily in my old leather armchair. On the desk, amongst a neat stack of mail, was a small, lacquered box where Gloria used to keep important papers. I hadn't opened it in over a year. My fingers, almost of their own accord, traced the smooth wood before lifting the lid. Inside, nestled amongst old birth certificates and property deeds, was a single envelope made of thick, cream-colored paper. My name, Reggie, was written on the front in her elegant, familiar script. My heart clenched. It was a letter she had written about a year before she passed, during a quiet afternoon when the illness had given her a moment of clarity. She had told me to read it only when I felt truly lost. I had forgotten all about it until now. With trembling hands, I unfolded the pages. Her words felt like a conversation across time. "My dearest Reggie," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone and you are feeling lost. Please don't be. Remember our life, remember our love, and let that be your guide. I am writing this because there is something heavy on my heart, something we have spoken of but never truly faced. Our son Darnell. I love him more than words can say, as do you. We have given him everything. But I fear, my love, that in giving him everything we have failed to give him the one thing that matters most, the strength to build something for himself." I had to stop and take a breath, the words blurring through a film of tears. I could almost hear her voice, gentle but firm, filled with a mother's fierce, anxious love. "You built an empire from dust, my love," she continued. "But he was born in the palace. He has never known the hunger that drives a man, only the comfort of a full plate. He sees your generosity not as a gift, but as an expectation. He is a good man in his heart, I believe that. But his heart is being suffocated by weakness and entitlement. Don't let our love become a crutch that cripples him for life. Please, Reggie, when the time comes, be strong enough to let him fall. Be strong enough to make him stand on his own 2 feet. Our love was meant to be a foundation for him to build upon, not a furnished room for him to live in forever. It is the hardest love, the most painful love, but it is the only true love a parent can give. Be the father he needs, not the one he wants." I folded the letter carefully, my hands no longer trembling. A profound sense of clarity washed over me. The anger, the bitterness, the need for petty revenge, it all dissolved, replaced by a solemn purpose. This was no longer about a missed vacation or a wounded pride. This was about fulfilling a promise to the love of my life. I wasn't destroying my son's world out of spite. I was breaking it apart so that he might for the first time have the chance to build his own. Gloria had given me my final mission, and I would not fail her. The week that followed was the longest of my life. While Darnell and his family were soaking up the Jamaican sun, I was methodically dismantling their world. It started on Monday morning with a single unassuming white van that pulled up to the curb of the Sycamore Lane house. A man in a simple blue uniform got out. He was the locksmith. I met him on the porch, the original key in my hand. He was a professional, all business. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded, took the key, and got to work. The sound of his drill was jarring in the quiet suburban morning, a high-pitched whine that felt like it was boring a hole right through the heart of the family. I watched as he expertly removed the old lock, the one Tiffany had picked out, a fancy brushed nickel affair that cost $300. He replaced it with a heavy-duty deadbolt, a simple, brutally effective piece of hardware. When he was done, he handed me a set of 2 new keys. They felt heavy and cold in my palm. The click of the new bolts sliding into place was a sound of finality. A door had been closed permanently. The next day, the moving truck arrived. It wasn't some beat-up rental. It was a gleaming, modern vehicle from a high-end logistics company, the kind used to move art and antiques. The crew of 4 men who emerged were clean-cut and wore crisp uniforms. Their leader, a tall, stoic man named Hector, met me at the door with a clipboard. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his handshake firm, "we have instructions to pack and move the entire contents of this residence to the storage unit you specified. Is that correct?" "That is correct, Hector," I said. "I want you to be careful, treat the items with respect, but I want everything out, every piece of furniture, every book, every dish, every last sock." Hector simply nodded. "Understood, sir." He turned to his crew and gave a series of quiet, efficient commands, and then they began. It was a strange, surreal ballet of silent deconstruction. They worked with a quiet professionalism that was almost unnerving. There was no shouting, no loud music, just the soft sounds of tape being pulled from a dispenser, the rustle of packing paper, and the low hum of their movements. They started upstairs in the master bedroom. I watched from the doorway as two men carefully wrapped Tiffany's ornate vanity table in thick, moving blankets. They packed her designer dresses and countless pairs of shoes into large wardrobe boxes with methodical precision. They dismantled the king-sized bed that I had paid for as a housewarming gift, its grand headboard now just another object swaddled in plastic. The children's rooms were the hardest. Watching them pack Maya's stuffed animals into a large box felt like a betrayal. I saw them take down a drawing she had made for me, a colorful crayon picture of the two of us holding hands still taped to her wall. For a moment my resolve wavered. Was I punishing them for the sins of their parents? The image of her innocent words spoken through the window flashed in my mind. "Mommy says we have to be extra nice to him so he'll keep paying for everything." The wavering stopped. I was not punishing them. I was trying to save them. They moved through the house like a silent tide, stripping it bare layer by layer. The living room with its 70-inch television and plush sectional sofa was disassembled in under an hour. The family photos on the mantelpiece, curated images of a happy, successful family, were carefully wrapped and placed in a box labeled "Fragile." The irony was sickening. The entire life was fragile, a house of cards built on my generosity, and the wind was finally blowing. I didn't stay inside for all of it. I couldn't. I sat in my car parked across the street, watching the men move in and out like ants, carrying away the pieces of a discarded feast. Each item that crossed the threshold, the expensive grill from the back patio, Jordan's video game console, the stand mixer from the kitchen counter, was a symbol of a life of unearned privilege, a life that was about to come to a screeching halt. Neighbors would occasionally walk by, their curiosity piqued by the moving truck, but no one stopped. No one asked questions. In these wealthy suburbs, people minded their own business. By late afternoon on the second day, they were finished. Hector did a final walkthrough with me through the now cavernous rooms. The house echoed. Every footstep was amplified. Sunlight streamed through the bare windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the empty air. Faint squares and rectangles on the walls marked where pictures used to hang. Indentations in the carpet showed where furniture had sat for years, like fossilized remains of a life that was now extinct. The house was no longer a home. It was just a shell, a collection of empty rooms filled with silence and the ghost of what used to be. "The job is complete," Mr. Hayes, Hector said, handing me the final paperwork. "The storage unit is locked and you have the only key." I thanked him and his crew. I watched their truck pull away from the curb and disappear around the corner. I stood alone in the empty house for a long time, the new key to the front door feeling like a lead weight in my pocket. The house was ready. The stage was set. All that was left was for the actors to arrive home and discover their play had been canceled. I stood in the doorway of what used to be the living room. The afternoon sun cast long rectangles of light across the bare hardwood floors, illuminating every scuff mark and imperfection that had been hidden under the rugs for years. The house wasn't just quiet, it was dead. The silence was so profound it had a physical weight to it, pressing in on me from all sides. I started to walk, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the vast emptiness. Each room was a chapter of my life, now stripped of its words. In the space where our big, comfortable sofa used to be, I could still see the faint indentations in the carpet. I remembered wrestling with a young Darnell on that sofa, his high-pitched laughter filling the room. I remembered bringing Gloria home from the hospital after Maya was born, laying her gently on that same sofa while we all just stared at this tiny miracle. They were just ghosts now, faint traces of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I walked into the kitchen. I ran my hand along the cool granite countertop, the one Gloria and I had picked out together. I could almost smell the scent of her Sunday roast, hear the sizzle of bacon on a Saturday morning. Darnell used to sit at the small breakfast nook struggling with his algebra homework, and Gloria would sit with him patient and kind. I had given him this life, this stability, this home filled with love. And he had traded it all for, what, a week in the sun and a sense of entitlement so vast it had blotted out everything else. Upstairs, the feeling of loss was even more acute. I stepped into Maya's room. The walls were a pale pink, a color she had chosen herself last year. Now they were just blank canvases. The movers had been thorough, but they had missed one thing. On the doorframe, I saw a series of small pencil marks marching their way up the wood. Each one had a date next to it written in my own blocky handwriting. Maya, 4 years. Maya, 5 years. Maya, 6 years. I reached out and touched the highest mark dated just 6 months ago. I remembered that day perfectly. She had stood on her tiptoes trying to be taller, her bright laughter filling the hallway as I told her she was growing as fast as a weed. Standing there in my granddaughter's empty room, touching the tangible proof of a love I thought was unconditional, the full weight of my actions crashed down on me. The cold resolve I had felt all week fractured, and a wave of gut-wrenching doubt washed over me. What was I doing? This was my family, my son, my grandchildren. Was I so consumed by pride and anger that I would make children homeless? Was I destroying the very legacy Gloria and I had worked so hard to build? The image of their confused faces at the airport haunted me. I wasn't a king tearing down a castle. I was just a bitter, lonely old man tearing his own family apart. The silence of the house no longer felt like peace. It felt like an accusation. My legs felt heavy as I walked back downstairs, my mind a storm of regret. I opened the front door, needing to get out to breathe air that wasn't thick with ghosts. Out of sheer lifelong habit, I checked the mailbox. It was empty except for a single glossy postcard. The front was a picture-perfect image of a white sand beach and impossibly blue water. I flipped it over. The handwriting was Tiffany's, a loopy, flamboyant script. "Hi, Dad," it read. "Jamaica is a dream. The weather is perfect and the kids are having an absolute blast. It's so relaxing here, you would have loved it. Wish you were here. Love, Darnell, Tiffany, Jordan, and Maya. Wish you were here." The 4 words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The casual, thoughtless hypocrisy, the sheer audacity of writing those words after leaving me standing alone in an airport. There was no apology, no hint of remorse, just a cheerful, lying little note meant to maintain the illusion. It was a postcard not from a family but from a corporation sending a hollow holiday greeting. In that moment, all my doubt, all my guilt evaporated like mist in a desert sun. The storm in my mind went still, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They hadn't just betrayed me. They felt nothing. They had learned nothing. I looked from the glossy lie in my hand to the empty, echoing house. The pain was still there, but the indecision was gone. This wasn't a punishment. It was a consequence, one they had earned 1,000 times over. I slid the postcard into my pocket. It would be the last piece of mail they ever received at this address. The final act of preparation took place at the large oak desk in my study. I had a simple, sturdy cardboard box in front of me. This wasn't about presentation. This was about delivering the truth cold and unvarnished. I began to assemble the contents, each piece chosen with deliberate, painful care. First, I placed the official eviction notice at the bottom. The document was crisp and impersonal, filled with the stark, unforgiving language of the law. Words like 30 days and vacate the premises felt both foreign and final. This single piece of paper represented the end of an era. It was the legal wall I was building between their life of entitlement and the real world. It was the foundation of their new reality. On top of that, I laid the financial statement. This was not a document from the bank. It was something I had spent 2 long nights compiling myself a ledger of a 15-year illusion. Page after page, it itemized every significant expense: the down payment on the house, the 2 luxury cars, the private school tuition for the children, the country club membership. But it also included the smaller things, the thousands of dollars in credit card bills for lavish dinners and designer clothes, the cell phone plans, the endless stream of emergency loans that were never paid back. At the end of the final page was the grand total, a number so large it looked like a misprint. It represented the staggering weight of a generosity they had mistaken for an obligation. It wasn't just an accounting. It was an indictment of their entire adult lives. Next came the cruelest and I felt most necessary part of the package. I had printed out a list of 2-bedroom apartment rentals in a decent working-class neighborhood on the other side of town places that cost a fraction of the mortgage I had been paying. Beside it, I placed 2 blank job application forms I had picked up from a local Home Depot. This was not to mock them. It was to show them the path forward, a path they would have to walk themselves. It was a stark message: your life of leisure is over. The real world is waiting. Here is your starting line. The last item was the one that cost me the most. I took a small silver-framed photograph from my desk. It was of me and Gloria on our wedding day. We were so young, standing outside a tiny church, me in a rented tuxedo and her in a simple dress she had made herself. We had nothing to our names but a fierce love for each other and a shared determination to build a life. But the joy in our eyes was real, more real than anything in the hundreds of staged family photos that had just been packed away. This photograph was the source of it all. This love, this partnership was the foundation upon which everything else had been built. I placed it gently on top of the pile of papers so it would be the last thing they saw. This, I wanted to say, is the legacy you have squandered. This is the love you have disrespected. I looked at the contents of the box one last time. It was a complete story. The law, the money, the consequences, and the reason. I folded the cardboard flaps closed and sealed the box with 3 strips of heavy-duty packing tape. The sound ripped through the quiet study, final and absolute. The package was ready, a time bomb of reality waiting on the doorstep. The show was about to begin. I sat in the deep leather armchair in my study, a glass of bourbon resting on the table beside me. The only light came from the glow of my tablet, which displayed a crisp, silent image from the security camera I'd had installed across from the house on Sycamore Lane. It was just after 9 p.m. A week had passed. The stage was set, the silence was profound, and I was the sole member of the audience waiting for the final act to start. Right on schedule, a pair of headlights turned onto the street. A yellow taxi van slowed and pulled up to the curb. The feed was clear enough to see everything. The side door slid open and my family spilled out onto the sidewalk, a chaotic tumble of tanned skin, bright vacation clothes, and oversized luggage. Darnell, looking tired but pleased with himself, began to wrestle the suitcases onto the curb. Tiffany emerged like a queen, returning to her castle, directing the luggage placement with imperious waves of her hand. Even from a distance, I could see the new, ridiculously expensive-looking handbag slung over her shoulder. A final purchase, no doubt, with my money. They were laughing. All of them. Jordan was showing something on his phone to Darnell, who threw his head back in a silent laugh. Maya was skipping up the walkway, her hair still in beaded braids from the resort. They were a perfect portrait of a happy, carefree family returning home completely oblivious to the fact that their home was no longer theirs. I imagined their conversation, the easy chatter about the flight, the complaints about returning to reality, the plans for what they'd eat for dinner. They were still wrapped in the warm, blissful bubble of the vacation I had provided, a bubble that was seconds away from bursting. Darnell paid the driver and the taxi pulled away, leaving them bathed in the soft glow of the porch light. He stretched, then started fumbling in the pocket of his shorts for his keys, still smiling. Tiffany said something to him and he chuckled, shaking his head. They were so comfortable, so secure in their world. They walked up the familiar stone path, the kids running ahead to the front door, expecting it to swing open into the life they had always known. I leaned closer to the screen. I watched as Darnell inserted his key into the new heavy-duty deadbolt. The silent video showed his hand turning, and then stopping. The key wouldn't budge. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He pulled the key out, stared at it as if it had personally offended him, and then jammed it back in, trying to force it. Nothing. The laughter died. The vacation was over. Tiffany, who had been directing Jordan with the luggage, noticed the delay. I could read the annoyance on her face even from across the street. She marched up the steps, her posture radiating impatience. "What's wrong now, Darnell?" I imagined her saying, her voice sharp. He mumbled a reply, shrugging helplessly. She rolled her eyes, a gesture I knew all too well, and snatched the keys from his hand. "Honestly," her body language screamed, "do I have to do everything myself?" She tried her own key. It met the same solid, unyielding resistance. Her arrogant confidence vanished, replaced by the same confusion that was on Darnell's face. She tried it again, then a third time. The kids who had been buzzing with energy now stood back on the lawn, quiet and watchful, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The happy homecoming had disintegrated into a tense, confusing standoff on their own doorstep. Darnell started pointing at the lock. Tiffany was shaking her head, her hands on her hips. They were arguing now, their silent, gesturing figures looking like frantic puppets in a play I had written. They were locked out of a life they thought they owned, and they still hadn't noticed the package. I took a slow sip of my bourbon. The real show was just about to start. The frustration on the porch was escalating. Darnell was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair, while Tiffany stood with her arms crossed, glaring at the front door as if she could intimidate it into opening. The magic of Jamaica had fully evaporated, replaced by the stale, familiar air of their own bickering. It was Jordan who finally broke the standoff. He had been standing back on the lawn, away from the immediate blast radius of his parents' argument, his eyes scanning the porch. "Dad," he said, his voice hesitant. "What's that?" He pointed to the plain cardboard box sitting innocuously by the doormat. Darnell and Tiffany both turned their annoyance, now finding a new target. "What now?" Tiffany snapped. "Did you order something and forget to tell me again, Darnell?" "I didn't order anything," he shot back, his voice defensive. "Well, it's a box, isn't it? Just bring it here, Jordan." Tiffany commanded, her tone suggesting the box was a personal affront to her. Jordan cautiously picked it up and placed it at her feet. For a moment, no one moved. It was just an ordinary box, but in the tense atmosphere it felt menacing. With an impatient sigh, Tiffany knelt and ripped at the packing tape. The sound was violent, tearing through the quiet evening. She threw open the flaps and looked inside. Her first reaction was confusion. "What is this? It's just a bunch of papers." She reached in and pulled out the top document, a single crisp sheet of paper. I watched her face on the tablet screen. I saw her eyes scan the official letterhead, saw the slight furrow of her brow as she read the bolded words at the top. "Notice to vacate." She stared at it for a long moment, and then a strange, brittle laugh escaped her lips. "Is this a joke?" she said, looking up at Darnell. "Did your father think this would be funny?" Darnell took the paper from her. His face, unlike hers, did not register amusement. As he read the cold legal phrases, 30 days to remove all personal property, the property of the Hayes family trust, I saw the color drain from his cheeks. He understood. This wasn't a joke. He looked from the paper to the unyielding lock on the door, and a flicker of genuine panic entered his eyes. While he was still processing the eviction, Tiffany was already digging back into the box, convinced this was all some elaborate misunderstanding that a single phone call would fix. Her hands emerged with a thick sheaf of papers neatly stapled. "What in the world is all this?" she muttered, flipping through the pages. I leaned forward in my chair. This was the ledger. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. I could see her recognizing the names of her favorite high-end stores, the restaurants, the country club. Then her eyes settled on the numbers in the right-hand column. Her flipping slowed. Her hand, the one holding the papers, began to tremble. Page after page, a detailed accounting of a life she thought she had earned. The car payments, the tuition, the vacations, the endless stream of cash transfers. It was all there in black and white. She finally reached the last page. At the bottom, a single number was circled in red ink. The grand total. The sound that came out of her was not human. It was a raw, guttural shriek of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. It was the sound of a queen realizing her castle was made of sand and the tide was coming in. The sound of an entire world collapsing in a single moment. Darnell dropped the eviction notice, startled by her scream. The kids who had been creeping closer flinched back as if they had been struck. Tiffany was still screaming, her face contorted, her knuckles white as she gripped the papers that represented her ruin. In the chaos, Darnell's eyes fell back into the box. He saw the other documents, the printed listings for small 2-bedroom apartments in neighborhoods he had never bothered to drive through. He saw the blank job applications, their logos stark and mocking. The eviction wasn't just a threat. It was part of a complete, horrifying plan. Amidst the scattered papers on the porch floor, one item lay face up, the small, silver-framed photograph of a young, smiling couple on their wedding day. My son saw it. While the money had broken Tiffany, it was the photograph that broke him. His anger, his panic, all of it seemed to just deflate. He stared at the image of his mother and me, at the realness of our simple, joyful beginning. He looked at that photo, then at his screaming wife, then at his crying children, and a wave of understanding so profound it brought him to his knees seemed to wash over him. He slumped against the front door, the fight gone out of him, replaced by a hollow, crushing despair. He finally understood. He had not just been locked out of a house. He had been permanently exiled from a legacy. His hands shaking, he pulled out his phone and frantically began to dial my number. I watched the screen light up on my desk, then calmly pressed the button to send his call to voicemail. The sound ripped out of Tiffany's throat, not a word but a primal scream of pure animalistic rage. It was the sound of a world ending. The carefully constructed facade of her life, built on my money and her delusions, had just been obliterated by a single number on a piece of paper. The scream tore through the placid quiet of the suburban night, sharp and ragged. The children flinched back, Maya burying her face in her brother's side, her small body trembling. That scream jolted Darnell from his stupor. He saw the wild, cornered look in his wife's eyes, the white-knuckled grip she had on the papers. He grabbed for them, and for a second they struggled, the ledger of their life of lies caught between them. He finally ripped it from her grasp, his eyes frantically scanning the last page until they found the circled total. His reaction was the opposite of hers. He didn't scream, he simply deflated, all the air rushing out of him in a choked gasp. The papers slipped from his nerveless fingers and fluttered to the porch. He looked around in a daze at his hysterical wife, his terrified children, the dark and empty windows of the house. This was real. This was happening. Panic, cold and absolute, finally seized him. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. He scrolled frantically until he found my name. On my tablet, I watched his desperate, silent figure. On my desk, my phone began to buzz, the screen lighting up with his name, Darnell Hayes. It buzzed once, twice, a third time. I let it go on, listening to the vibration echo in the quiet study. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I reached out and pressed the red icon on the screen, silencing the call. The buzzing stopped. The show was over. The line was disconnected, permanently. The following morning, they were on my doorstep. I had been expecting them. I watched on my security camera as their taxi, not a luxury SUV, but a standard yellow cab, pulled up. They didn't look like they had just returned from a five-star resort. They looked like refugees. Their expensive vacation clothes were rumpled. Their tans already seemed faded under the harsh light of their new reality. Tiffany's eyes were puffy and red from crying, her face a mask of bitter resentment. Darnell just looked broken, a hollowed-out version of the confident man who had left for the airport a week ago. I let them ring the doorbell twice before I opened the door. They stood there, a pathetic, defeated pair on the threshold of the home where Darnell had grown up. The silence was thick with unspoken accusations. Finally, Darnell spoke, his voice cracking. "Dad, how could you do this?" It wasn't a question of genuine curiosity. It was an accusation laced with a lifetime of entitled disbelief. "How could you do this to us, to your own grandchildren?" Before I could answer, Tiffany pushed past him, her voice a low, trembling hiss of fury. "Do this! He's trying to ruin us, Darnell! That's what this is!" She turned to me, her face contorted in a sneer that was part rage, part desperation. "Is this your plan, Reginald? To make us homeless? To see your own grandchildren sleeping on the street? Do you hate us that much?" Her words were meant to wound, to shame me into submission. A week ago they might have. But I had read Gloria's letter. I had stood in the silence of that empty house. Their theatrics had lost their power over me. "We have nothing," Darnell whispered, his voice catching. "The bank accounts are frozen. The credit cards are canceled. We spent our last $100 on the taxi to get here. We have nothing, Dad." Then came the tears. Tiffany, realizing her anger was having no effect, switched tactics. Her face crumpled and she began to sob, great gulping theatrical sobs. "We'll be on the street," she wailed, covering her face with her hands. "He's throwing us out onto the street with our children." What are we supposed to do? It was a pathetic performance. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were only sorry they had been caught. They weren't devastated by their betrayal. They were devastated by the consequences. I looked at their two faces, one twisted in fake sorrow, the other in hollow despair, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty calm. I stepped back from the door, holding it open. "Come inside," I said, my voice even devoid of the emotion they were so desperately trying to provoke. "Let's talk." I led them not into the living room but into my study. I gestured for them to sit in the 2 chairs facing my large oak desk, the same chairs where I had signed the checks that funded their lives for years. They sat down hesitantly like disobedient children called to the principal's office. I remained standing, a deliberate choice. For the first time, I was claiming the authority in this relationship that I had long ago abdicated. I let the silence hang in the air, letting their accusations and manufactured sobs die away into nothing. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet, but it filled the room. Homeless. I began repeating Tiffany's word. No, you're not going to be homeless. I've already paid for a week's stay for you and the children at a clean, respectable hotel downtown. The key is on the table. I gestured to a single key card lying on the corner of the desk. And all of your possessions, every last designer handbag and video game console, are safe in a climate-controlled storage unit. I've paid for the first 3 months. The key to that is also on the table. They both stared at the keys as if they were venomous snakes. This wasn't the script they had prepared for. They had come expecting a screaming match, a negotiation, a tearful reconciliation. They were not prepared for calm, organized logistics. You think this is about hate? I continued, looking directly at Tiffany. This has nothing to do with hate. Hate is a passionate emotion. What I feel right now is a profound sense of disappointment. This is about consequences. I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden Gloria and I had planted. For 15 years, I said, my back to them. I have watched you both. I watched Darnell abandon every ambition he ever had because it was easier to take my money than to make his own. I watched you, Tiffany, cultivate a lifestyle of luxury you did nothing to earn, teaching my grandchildren that the measure of a person's worth is the label on their clothes. I turned back to face them. You talk about your children. Let me tell you about my grandchildren. A week ago, I heard my granddaughter Maya tell her friend on the phone that she had to be extra nice to me so I would keep paying for everything. A 10-year-old child. That is the lesson you have taught her. That love is a performance. That her grandfather is not a man to be loved and respected, but an ATM to be flattered and manipulated. Did you really think that could go on forever? Darnell opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just shook his head, a look of pathetic denial on his face. And then there was the vacation, I said, my voice dropping lower. The dream trip to a place your mother and I always wanted to go. I offered it as a gift, a final test perhaps, and you failed it spectacularly. You took my money, you took my dream, and then you decided to take my dignity as well. I fixed my gaze on Darnell. You stood there not 20 feet from me, and you lied to my face, a clumsy, pathetic lie about the flight being overbooked. But I heard her, Darnell. I shifted my eyes to Tiffany, who visibly flinched. I heard your wife's whisper through the phone. Finally, a vacation without this old man. Do you have any idea what those words did? They didn't just hurt me. They liberated me. They cut the final thread of obligation I felt towards the life you had chosen to live. I walked over to my desk and picked up the framed photo of me and Gloria on our wedding day. I held it up so they could see it. This is what I come from, I said softly. This woman and I started with nothing. We built a life, a business, and a family on a foundation of hard work, mutual respect, and a love that was stronger than any hardship. We wanted to give you a better start, Darnell. We wanted to give you a foundation. But we never intended for you to spend your entire life living in our basement. Your mother worried about this. In her last year, she told me, "Don't let our love become a crutch that cripples him." For years I failed her. I was weak. I kept enabling you, hoping you would one day become the man I knew you could be. That ends today. I put the photograph down. So no, I am not throwing you on the street. I am pushing you out of the nest. The house is sold. The money is locked away in a trust that you will not touch. In that package, there were apartment listings and job applications. That wasn't a joke. That is your new life. You will learn the value of $1 because you will have to earn it. You will learn the meaning of respect because you will no longer be in a position to demand it. You will become parents your children can actually look up to, not just providers of material goods. I picked up the 2 keys from the desk and held them out. This is not an act of revenge. This is the last and perhaps only true act of fatherly love I have left to give you. It is the hardest lesson I will ever have to teach. Your life of ease is over. Your real life begins now. They just sat there, stunned into silence, the full, crushing weight of my words finally landing. There were no more tears, no more accusations. There was only the quiet, terrifying dawn of a new reality. After a long moment, Darnell slowly rose, his movements, stiff and old, and took the keys from my hand. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. Without a word, he and Tiffany turned and walked out of the study and out of my life as I had known it. The front door closed behind them with a soft, final click. They stared at me, their faces blank with shock, the full weight of their new reality finally crashing down. There were no more tears, no more accusations. There was only the quiet, terrifying dawn of their new life. After a long, heavy silence, Darnell slowly rose from his chair, his movements stiff as if he had aged 20 years in the last 10 minutes. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. I picked up the 2 keys, one for the hotel room, one for the storage unit, and held them out. Beside them, I placed a single folded check from my personal account. "This is $5,000, I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It is not a gift. It is severance pay. It's enough for you to put a deposit on a small apartment and buy groceries while you look for work. It is the last dollar you will ever receive from me. Use it wisely." He reached out a trembling hand and took the keys and the check. The finality of the act hung in the air between us. This was the transaction that officially ended his childhood. Without a word, he turned. Tiffany, looking pale and shrunken, followed him out of the study. I walked them to the front door, the same door Darnell had burst through countless times as a boy, full of life and laughter. They paused on the threshold but didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. I simply closed the door, the sound of the latch clicking into place echoing the finality of the new deadbolt on their old house. As I stood there in the sudden silence, I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I just felt the profound, aching quiet of a long and difficult chapter finally coming to an end. The past was now a closed door. What lay ahead for them was their story to write. My part in it was over. I didn't hear from them directly in the weeks that followed. The silence was absolute, but I didn't need to. Evelyn Reed, my lawyer, kept me discreetly informed. She was, as always, thorough. The life they fell into was not one of destitution, but one of brutal, unforgiving reality. The $5,000 I gave them was gone in less than 2 weeks spent on the security deposit and first month's rent for a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in a neighborhood they used to speed through with their windows up. The grand 6-bedroom house on Sycamore Lane was replaced by thin walls, the sound of their neighbors' arguments, and the constant hum of the dryers from below. The manicured lawn was replaced by a concrete courtyard with a single struggling tree. There was no more private school. Jordan and Maya were enrolled in the local public school, a crowded, underfunded institution that was a world away from the manicured campuses and small class sizes they were used to. Tiffany, the lifestyle blogger, found work. Not as a social media consultant or a brand ambassador, but as a retail associate at a department store in the mall, the same mall where she used to spend thousands of dollars in an afternoon. I could picture her forced to smile at customers folding sweaters for 8 hours a day, her feet aching in sensible shoes. Her work was no longer a hobby. It was a necessity to pay the electric bill. Her hands, once perfectly manicured, were now probably dry and chapped from handling cardboard boxes in the stockroom. Darnell found a job at a call center selling insurance policies over the phone. He who had once held a cushy, do-nothing marketing job I had secured for him was now tethered to a headset facing rejection and verbal abuse from strangers, his success measured in daily quotas. The luxury SUV was gone, sold for a fraction of its worth to cover their initial expenses. They now shared a 10-year-old sedan that probably rattled every time it went over a speed bump. Their punishment was not poverty. It was mediocrity. It was the soul-crushing, day-in, day-out grind of a normal life that they had spent their entire marriage trying to outrun. There were no more spontaneous weekend getaways, no more lavish dinners where the cost of the wine was more than their new weekly grocery budget. Their lives became a stressful, exhausting cycle of working, paying bills, and dealing with the mundane frustrations of a life without a safety net. This was the consequence. Not a dramatic fall from grace, but a slow, grinding descent into the ordinary world they had always held in such contempt. They were no longer special. They were just like everyone else, and I knew for them that was the cruelest fate of all. About a month after the confrontation, when I had almost resigned myself to the silence, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. "Hello," I said. There was a hesitant pause on the other end. "Grandpa." The voice was quiet, almost a whisper. It was Jordan. I felt my heart give a painful lurch. "Jordan," I said, keeping my own voice steady. "It's good to hear from you." "Yeah, you too," he mumbled. There was another long silence, filled with the awkwardness of a 15-year-old trying to navigate a world of adult failures. "Listen," he finally said, rushing the words out. I'm sorry for, everything, at the airport." It was the apology I had never expected to receive, and it wasn't from the people who owed it most. It was from a child caught in the middle. "Thank you for saying that, Jordan," I said softly. "That means a lot to me." Can I see you?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Maya misses you too. A lot." We met the following Saturday at a small park halfway between my house and their new apartment. I sat on a bench, and soon they came walking towards me, two solitary figures without their parents. Jordan looked older, the carefree arrogance of a privileged teenager replaced by a more somber, watchful expression. Maya ran the last few feet and threw her arms around my legs, burying her face in my side. I held her close, stroking her hair. We didn't talk about the incident or their parents or their new life. I just bought them ice cream and we walked by the duck pond, and for an hour we were just a grandfather and his grandchildren. I knew that just talking wasn't enough. Words had become hollow in our family. They needed something real. The next weekend I called them. "I've got a leaky faucet in my kitchen," I said to Jordan. "I could use an extra pair of hands if you're not busy." He came over that Saturday with Maya in tow. I didn't treat him like a guest. I treated him like an apprentice. I laid out the tools on the floor, named each one, and showed him exactly how to shut off the water main. I let him get his hands dirty, guiding him as he used the wrench to tighten the compression fitting. He was clumsy at first, but he was focused. "You can't just force it," I told him, my hand over his on the wrench. "You have to feel it. Feel when it's snug. You do it right the first time and it won't fail you when you're not looking." He nodded, a look of intense concentration on his face. Maya sat at the kitchen table drawing, but I knew she was listening to every word. When we were done and the faucet worked perfectly without a single drop, a look of genuine pride spread across Jordan's face. It was a look I hadn't seen on my own son's face in 30 years. Our weekends became a new tradition. We didn't go to expensive restaurants or theme parks. We worked. We fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door. We cleaned the gutters. We spent most of our time in the garden, the place Gloria had loved most. I showed Maya how to tell the difference between a weed and a seedling. I taught Jordan how to properly mix soil and fertilizer, how to prune the rose bushes to encourage new growth. Your grandmother always said a garden teaches you patience. I told them one afternoon, my hands deep in the rich soil. You can't rush it. You just have to give it the right conditions, protect it from the bad stuff, and trust that it will grow strong on its own. I never once spoke a negative word about Darnell or Tiffany. I didn't have to. The lessons were in the work. And in the satisfaction of repairing something broken with your own hands, in the quiet joy of nurturing a small plant and watching it bloom, I was giving them what their parents never had: a foundation. I was rebuilding my family, not with money, but with time, with respect, and with the quiet dignity of a job well done. And in the process, I was rebuilding myself. A few months later, on a warm Sunday afternoon, the kind Gloria had always loved, I was on my knees in the garden. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming roses and rich earth. To my left, Jordan, now taller and with a newfound confidence in his hands, was carefully staking a tomato plant. To my right, Maya was humming a little tune as she watered the new bed of marigolds, her movements gentle and sure. We worked in a comfortable silence, punctuated by the buzz of bees and the occasional shared laugh. There were no expensive gadgets here, no designer clothes. Just the three of us, our hands stained with soil, our faces warmed by the sun. I watched them, my grandchildren, and I saw a strength and a contentment in them that had never been there before. They weren't just visiting. They were a part of this place. They were helping to create something beautiful and real. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. I had not lost my family. I had simply cut away the rot to save the roots. The hollow ache in my chest, the one I had carried since Gloria's passing, was gone. It had been filled not with what money could buy, but with the simple, quiet joy of a shared purpose. I looked up at the clear blue sky, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak tree. I felt Gloria's presence all around me, in the warmth of the sun, in the laughter of our grandchildren, in the steady, hopeful rhythm of this new life we were building. I smiled a true deep smile that reached my eyes. "We did it, Gloria," I whispered to the wind. "We finally did it." This story teaches us that true parental love isn't just about providing, it's about preparing. Shielding our children from hardship with money can inadvertently cripple them, creating a sense of entitlement that suffocates their potential. The most difficult yet most loving act can be to step back and let them face the consequences of their choices. It is only by learning to stand on their own 2 feet that they can truly learn to walk, building a life based on their own strength and character, not on a foundation of unearned privilege. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.